The silk rustled like whispered secrets as Lady Agnes Whitmore swept past, holding her skirts high enough that Clara could see the embroidered hem she had stitched by lamplight. "Mind the train, Clara," Lady Agnes said, without looking down. "If Her Majesty sees a single loose thread, it will be your doing." "Yes, stepmother," Clara replied, fingers already working to smooth the fabric. No one remarked how deftly she moved, how careful and precise her hands were. No one noticed that she had been awake half the night adjusting seams and reworking bodices so that Lady Agnes and her daughter might shine beneath the chandeliers of the royal ballroom. No one ever noticed Clara Whitmore at all. The drawing room glowed with candlelight. Boxes of jewellery lay open along the sideboard, pearls and diamonds spilling like pieces of moonlight. Footmen hurried in and out with hat boxes and gloves. Her father, Lord Whitmore, stood by the fireplace, tugging absently at his cuffs, while he listened to Lady Agnes detail each part of the evening's strategy, as though a royal ball were a battlefield, and Beatrice her only general. "Remember, my lord," Lady Agnes said, fastening a diamond choker around her own throat, "Beatrice must dance before midnight with at least one marquess or higher. The Duke of Ashbourne will be present. His estate is vast, and he is in need of a wife." Beatrice, seated in front of the mirror, smiled at her reflection. She was all golden curls and powdered shoulders, her gown a pale blue that made her eyes appear lighter, emptier. "Do you suppose he likes blondes?" Beatrice asked, tilting her head. "I suppose he likes dowries," Lord Whitmore muttered, but there was no real humour in it. Lines had deepened around his eyes in recent years, and Clara knew why. Debts, quietly spoken of in corridors when they believed she was not listening. Investments that had failed. The Whitmore estate needed a salvation that Clara, as a daughter with no fortune of her own, could not provide. She adjusted Beatrice's sleeve, fingers grazing the delicate lace. "Tighter, Clara," Beatrice complained, wrinkling her nose. "I want it to sit just so. Lady Weston's modiste said the French sleeves in Paris are like this, not the loose country fashions you favour." Clara bit back a reply. She did not favour any fashions. She wore whatever garments Beatrice tired of, after the seams were let out and the trimmings removed. Her father's voice broke through her thoughts. "Beatrice will dazzle them all," he said, though his gaze never once drifted to Clara. "You will make us proud, my dear." "I shall, Papa," Beatrice replied sweetly, rising so the gown shimmered around her like the petals of some extravagant flower. Lady Agnes turned at last to Clara. "You may wait in the schoolroom this evening," she said, as casually as if she were discussing the weather. "If your needle is steady, you might begin unpicking the trim from last season's gowns. They can be altered for next year's assemblies." Clara swallowed. "I had hoped just to look from the gallery, perhaps. The royal ball is such a rare—" Lady Agnes laughed, bright and sharp. "The gallery? My dear girl, this is not some village assembly with pipe smoke and stale biscuits. The king himself will be present. The nobility of all England will be watching. It is no place for onlookers, for ghosts," Clara heard instead, "for daughters who did not matter." Her father cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Perhaps another year, Clara," he said, adjusting his cufflinks again, as though they held answers. "This evening is as important, for Beatrice, for the family, for the debts." "Of course," Clara murmured. The polite response came easily. It was a script she knew by heart. She stepped back as the household whirled around her. A maid approached carrying a velvet case. "The Whitmore rubies, my lady," the girl said. "On Beatrice," Lady Agnes ordered. "They must see at once that she is a woman of consequence." Clara watched as the rubies, her late mother's rubies, were fastened around her half-sister's throat. They burned crimson against Beatrice's pale skin, a wound that Clara alone could feel. Her mother had worn them only once, the night she herself was presented at court. Clara remembered the story whispered by an old housekeeper, how Lord Whitmore could not take his eyes off her mother that night, how he had spoken vows of love beneath the music and light. Those memories had not kept him from remarrying, nor from forgetting that the rubies had once been a promise. "Clara, stop staring. Bring the shawl," Lady Agnes snapped. Clara obeyed. That was what she did. That was what invisible daughters were for. Outside, the rumble of wheels and the clatter of hooves announced the arrival of the carriage. The house seemed to hold its breath. Footmen hurried to fetch cloaks. Lady Agnes gave last-minute instructions. Beatrice practiced a curtsy. That was artfully modest and entirely calculated. "You look lovely, Bee," Clara said softly, settling the shawl around her sister's shoulders. Beatrice caught her reflection and smiled, not at Clara, but at the girl in the mirror. "I know," she replied, and then they were gone. The front door closed with a solid, echoing sound that seemed to reverberate down the corridors and into Clara's chest. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. broken only by the tick of the long case clock in the hall. The royal ball had begun. Candles were being lit, music tuned, names announced beneath gilded ceilings. Clara stood alone in the empty drawing room, surrounded by abandoned boxes and scattered ribbons, the air still carrying the faint scent of Beatrice's perfume. Her gaze drifted to the far corner, where a plain wooden trunk stood half hidden behind a screen. It was old, the brass fittings dulled. With time, her mother's trunk. No one bothered with it anymore. As the clock chimed the hour, Clara moved toward it, heart beating faster for reasons she could not quite name. Her hand hovered over the latch. Perhaps before the night was over, she would not feel quite so invisible. The latch gave way with a soft click. Inside, the scent of lavender and old paper rose up like a memory. Clara lifted the top layer of neatly folded linen and found, beneath it, a spill of ivory silk. Her breath caught. She had seen sketches of her mother's presentation gown tucked into an old journal, but she had never touched the real thing. Now it lay in her hands, heavy and cool, the fabric whispering as she drew it out of the trunk. It was not like Beatrice's glittering confection. This gown was simpler, its beauty in the cut and drape rather than in the profusion of jewels. The silk was the color of cream with a faint sheen that caught the light. Tiny seed pearls traced the neckline, and the short sleeves were edged with delicate embroidery. Clara recognized the tiny rosebuds her mother had favored. Her throat tightened. At the very bottom of the trunk, something clicked against wood. Clara reached in and found a small flat box tied with a faded blue ribbon. Her fingers trembled as she untied it. Inside lay a pair of gloves, still white, despite the years, and a slender chain with a single teardrop pearl. Beneath them, folded crisply despite the passage of time, was an envelope. Her name was written on it in her mother's hand. For Clara. The words blurred. She sank to her knees on the carpet, the gown pooling around her, and broke the seal. My dearest girl, if you are reading this, it means you are older now than I was when I first held you. I do not know if I shall be there to see you grow, but I know this. The world will try to tell you that you are less than you are. Do not believe it. I have left this gown for you. It was the one I wore when I was first presented, the night your father looked at me as if I were the only soul in the room. I dreamed once of seeing you wear it to your own first ball. If circumstances prevent that, then I charge those who love you to be brave in your stead. Let you be seen, Clara. You were never meant to live only in shadows. With all my love, Mama. Clara's tears fell, dark spots appearing on the aged paper. Mama, she whispered, the word sounding small in the quiet room. Lady Clara? The voice made her start. She turned to see Mrs. Briggs standing in the doorway, cap slightly askew, hands wringing her apron. The housekeeper's eyes widened as she took in the open trunk, the gown, the letter in Clara's hand. Oh, my lamb, Mrs. Briggs murmured, stepping forward. You found it at last. At last, Clara repeated, blinking. Mrs. Briggs hesitated, then knelt beside her with creaking knees. Her ladyship gave that trunk into my keeping before she passed. Said I was to watch over it until you were ready. She wanted you to wear that gown to your first proper ball. The older woman's gaze flicked to the door, as though expecting Lady Agnes to materialize. But there was never a chance, was there? Not once your father remarried. Clara folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into its envelope, as though it was something holy. She wrote, she wanted me to be seen. Mrs. Briggs's mouth compressed. Your mother knew what kind of woman Lady Agnes was. She gave me a small purse of money, too, hidden in that trunk. Said it was for when courage was needed. I've kept it all these years, but she shook her head. I've been a coward, my girl, watching you fade into the wallpaper. I do not blame you, Clara said softly. Truly, she did not. Everyone in the house orbited Lady Agnes's displeasure. Mrs. Briggs drew a breath, squaring her shoulders. Well, I'll not be a coward another night. Clara stared at her. What do you mean? The housekeeper's eyes were bright now, almost fierce. There's a royal ball this very evening, and Lord Whitmore's carriage has already taken her ladyship and Miss Beatrice away. The house is quiet. The staff at the palace, they've known me these 20 years, and there's always a need for another lady's companion, another extra name on a list that nobody checks too closely once the music starts. She reached for the gown, letting the silk spill between her fingers. Put it on, Clara. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. Mrs. Briggs, I cannot. I have no invitation, no jewels, no... You have this gown. Mrs. Briggs tapped the envelope. You have your mother's blessing, and you have me to see you as far as the palace gates. After that, a hint of a smile. After that, we let Providence decide. The idea was madness, reckless, impossible. Yet as Clara looked down at the ivory silk in her lap, she felt something stir inside her, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. It felt like courage. Within half an hour, with Mrs. Briggs's sure, work-worn hands guiding hers, Clara stood before her mirror. The gown fit as if it had been made for her. Her dark hair, usually twisted into a plain knot, was arranged in soft waves, a few curls left to frame became her face. The teardrop pearl rested at the hollow of her throat. She looked not beautiful exactly, but present, solid, like a person one might actually see. Mrs. Briggs wiped at her eyes with the corner of her apron. "Your mother would have been proud." Clara curled her fingers around the envelope in her hand. "Just to watch," she said, more to herself than to the older woman. "From the shadows, from the gallery if I can reach it. Just to watch," Mrs. Briggs agreed, though there was something like doubt in her voice. "Come now, before I lose my nerve." Night had fallen by the time they slipped out through the servants' entrance. The Whitmore carriage was long gone. They hired a hackney with Mrs. Briggs's carefully hoarded coins. London rolled past in a blur of gaslight and cobbles, the air sharp with winter and coal smoke. As the hackney drew up before the palace, Clara could see the blaze of windows, hear the faint strains of an orchestra floating into the night. Carriages lined the drive, livery gleaming. Titles and names called out in sonorous tones at the great doors. Mrs. Briggs gripped her hand. "Remember," she whispered, "you have as much right to be seen as any of them." Clara stepped down from the carriage. Her mother's silk rustled around her ankles. Heart hammering, she lifted her chin and followed the music toward the light. The palace steps rose before her like a marble cliff, flanked by torches that threw golden light onto polished stone. Gentlemen in gleaming boots and ladies in shimmering gowns moved past her in a rustle of fabrics and soft laughter. For a moment, Clara hovered at the edge of it all, fingers tight around her mother's letter, feeling as though she had stepped into a painting that might reject her at any instant. "Head up, lamb," Mrs. Briggs whispered at her side. "You belong here as much as any of them." It did not feel true. Yet, Clara lifted her chin. At the great doors, liveried guards and footmen formed a kind of human gate. A steward with an imposing ledger called out names as gilded invitations were presented. "Lord and Lady Berwick, Sir Edmund Fairfax and Miss Fairfax." The line moved. Sweat beaded at Clara's palms. When their turn came, Mrs. Briggs dipped a curtsy. "Mrs. Briggs, in service to the Whitmore family," she said in a low voice. "And this is Miss Clara Whitmore, come as companion to her sister, Lady Beatrice." "Whitmore." Her ladyship and Miss Beatrice arrived earlier with Lord Whitmore in the first carriage. She said it calmly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The steward's gaze swept over Clara from her curls to the hem of her gown. His eyes lingered on the quality of the silk, the discreet pearls. It was a gown that carried its own kind of introduction. Clara felt the weight of his scrutiny like a physical thing. If he asked for an invitation, if he sent for Lady Agnes, he ran a finger down his ledger. "Lord Whitmore's party," he murmured. "Very well. You are late, Miss Whitmore." Yes," Clara stammered, hardly daring to breathe. He gestured. "Proceed. Announced? Or will you join your family directly?" "Announced." The word made her blood drain from her face. To have her name ring out across that glittering hall, to draw eyes, and perhaps her stepmother's wrath. "Not announced," she said quickly. "If you please." The steward nodded, already turning to the next arrival. "As you wish." They passed under the carved archway into a blaze of light and sound. The ballroom took her breath. Hundreds of candles burned in crystal chandeliers, their light multiplied in mirrors that climbed to a painted ceiling. Musicians on a raised dais coaxed music from violins and flutes. The scent of beeswax, roses, and too many perfumes mingled in the warm air. Figures moved across the polished floor in a procession of color. Gowns in jewel tones, uniforms with shining buttons, orders and sashes catching the light. Laughter rose and fell, punctuated by the occasional ripple of polite applause as a notable personage passed. Clara felt very small. Mrs. Briggs squeezed her arm. "Up those stairs near the gallery," she murmured, indicating a graceful staircase that curved along the side of the room. "From there you can see everything and no one will think to look for you." "And you?" Clara whispered. "I'll lurk below stairs with the other respectable shadows," Mrs. Briggs replied, soft affection in her eyes. "Now go before I scoop you up and haul you home myself." Clara managed a watery smile and obeyed. She climbed slowly, the banister cool beneath her fingers. With each step, a wider sweep of the ballroom unfolded. Near the center, beneath one of the chandeliers, she saw them. Lady Agnes, resplendent in dark plum silk, fan moving like the wing of a predatory bird. Beatrice, haloed in blue and rubies, laughing up at some gentleman whose face Clara could not see. Her father stood slightly behind them, expression a mixture of pride and strain. Even at a distance, Clara recognized the way his shoulders hunched minutely whenever Lady Agnes leaned close to speak. They looked complete, a polished family tableau. She was nowhere in it. Clara moved to the edge of the gallery, where a shadowed alcove afforded a clear view of the floor. No one spared her a glance. She could have been part of the architecture. Music swelled. Couples began to form for a country dance. Names floated upward with the music, snippets of conversation catching on the air. Says His Grace of Ashbourne has been absent from town these 3 seasons. Lost a brother in the war, I heard. Keeps mostly to his estates now, but his title is one of the oldest, and rumour says his coffers are far from empty. The name seemed to hum through the crowd. Ashbourne. Clara searched for him without meaning to, eyes scanning the mass of dark coats and gleaming stars, but she had no idea what the Duke looked like. For all she knew, he was one of the many tall men in severe black, their expressions bored, their dance partners eager. She might never know. He belonged to Beatrice's world, not hers. Below, Beatrice curtsied prettily as a young viscount bowed to claim her hand for the dance. Lady Agnes watched, triumphant. Clara's heart twisted. She loved her sister in a way, despite all the thoughtless cruelties. Beatrice had simply been taught that Clara was less. 2 footmen passed close to her in the gallery, bearing trays of crystal glasses that chimed softly. Clara stepped back to avoid them, pressing deeper into shadow. And then, from below, a sudden clatter, a tray slipping, a glass shattering. There was a gasp, a ripple of shock. Clara leaned forward instinctively. One of the younger serving girls had stumbled. A glass of scarlet wine lay in shards at the feet of a gentleman in a dark, impeccably cut coat. The wine had splashed his waistcoat, a vivid stain spreading. The girl dropped into a curtsy, stammering apologies, face white. Around them a circle of distance formed, polite, curious, faintly amused. Clara's cheeks burned in sympathy. She knew too well how it felt to be the one who erred, while others watched. The gentleman looked down at himself, then at the trembling girl. His face was in profile from where Clara stood. A strong jaw, hair a shade too dark to be called simply brown, a certain stillness in the way he held himself, as if long accustomed to scrutiny. Another man stepped forward, laughing. "Well, Ashbourne, it seems the wine has taken a particular liking to you." Ashbourne, the gentleman, Ashbourne, smiled, but it did not quite reach his eyes. He inclined his head to the girl. When he spoke, Clara could not hear his words, but she saw the way the girl's shoulders eased, saw the faint, puzzled relief on her face. Whatever he had said, it had not been cruel. Clara drew back, pulse quickened, as the music faltered, and the master of ceremonies stepped forward with his staff. "Your Majesties, my lords, ladies and gentlemen," he called, voice ringing through the ballroom. "The first waltz of the evening now begins. His Grace the Duke of Ashbourne will lead." Heads turned as Ashbourne moved toward the center of the floor, and in that same instant, as Clara watched from her shadowed height, his gaze lifted, straight toward the gallery, straight toward her. For a heartbeat, the ballroom seemed to fall away. Clara's fingers tightened on the carved rail, breath caught low in her lungs, as the Duke's gaze fixed, unerringly, on the shadowed alcove where she stood. It was impossible. There were hundreds of people below him, a blaze of jewels and silk and polished boots. Why would his eyes climb to the dim gallery, to the place where the unimportant watchers hid? Yet they had. She felt the impact of that look like touch. His eyes were not the cold, haughty blue she had imagined in a man of such rank. They were darker, storm-colored, watchful. For the brief span of a held breath, Clara had the maddening sense that he truly saw her, as if the shadows had thinned and she were outlined in light. Then the Master of Ceremonies' staff struck the floor, with a sharp crack snapping the spell. "His Grace the Duke of Ashbourne and Her Royal Highness Princess Charlotte will open the waltz." A murmur rippled through the crowd as a young princess in palest rose silk stepped forward, curtsying with practiced grace. The Duke's gaze dropped as protocol demanded, and Clara sagged back into the alcove, her heart pounding. "Don't be foolish," she whispered to herself, pressing cool fingers to her burning cheeks. He was looking at nothing, at no one. The orchestra began, violins drawing out the first sweet, circling notes. Below, the Duke bowed to his royal partner. As they began to move, the rest of the couples gradually joined, the floor slowly filling with turning figures. From her vantage point, Clara could see the perfection of the pattern, the Duke's hand firm at the princess's back, the precise measure of space between them, the fluidity of his steps. He did not smile much. His expression was courteous, controlled. Only when the dance turned him so that his profile cut against the light did she catch, now and then, a flicker of something more complicated in his face, a tautness about the mouth, a watchfulness that never quite relaxed. He looked, she thought, like a man enduring a duty rather than reveling in admiration. Her gaze slid to where Lady Agnes stood, fan fluttering more rapidly now. She was angling Beatrice nearer to the edge of the floor, maneuvering her into the Duke's path as the waltz came to its end. Beatrice's cheeks were prettily flushed. She laughed at something a baron said, but her eyes kept straying to the tall figure in black. As the final notes faded and the princess curtsied, Ashbourne bowed and escorted her to the edge of the dance, where their majesties sat in state. A hum of anticipation ran through the crowd. Speculation hung in the air like perfume. Who will he dance with next? Surely Lady Caroline. Her father has been all but shoving her at him all evening. Nonsense! Lady Agnes Whitmore has practically erected a barricade to funnel him straight to that daughter of hers, the pretty one. The words drifted upward, ugly in their calculation. Clara's hands tightened on the rail, and indeed, Lady Agnes was moving, drawing Beatrice forward with her, her fan snapping shut like a weapon. Lord Whitmore trailed them, looking vaguely alarmed, as if sensing the tide, but lacking the strength to resist. Clara watched, a strange hollow opening in her chest. Beatrice had been dressed for this very moment, an arrow aimed squarely at Ashbourne's heart and fortune. The Duke, having discharged his royal obligation, turned toward the crowd with a slight bow. Ladies along. His path brightened. A few all but glowed. It would take so little for him to claim one to alter the course of her life with the offer of his hand. Lady Agnes nudged Beatrice forward, toward the gap in the throng opening like a funnel toward him. Clara could not bear to see her stepmother's scheming succeed so seamlessly, or perhaps she could not bear to witness how absolutely she herself did not matter in these designs. The air in the gallery felt suddenly close, heavy with candle smoke and longing. She stepped back from the rail. The shadows enfolded her gladly. Turning away from the dazzling sweep of the ballroom, she followed the curve of the gallery toward a quieter end, where the music softened and the murmur of voices became a distant, indistinct wash. A small door stood ajar, leading into a corridor lined with portraits and tall windows, giving onto the darkened gardens beyond. Here at least she could breathe. For a moment she simply stood, palms flat against the cool stone of the wall, eyes closed. The echo of the waltz vibrated faintly through the building, like a remembered heartbeat. You came to watch, nothing more, she reminded herself. No one knows you are here. No one expects anything of you. That is a comfort, not a curse. Her mother's letter rustled against her bodice, as if in gentle protest. Footsteps sounded at the end of the corridor. Clara straightened, smoothing her skirts instinctively. A pair of laughing young ladies swept past without a glance, chattering about the relative merits of two colonels. A footman hurried by next, bearing a tray of champagne flutes. She turned to retreat to the gallery and collided with someone just stepping through the same narrow doorway. The impact knocked her slightly off balance. A gloved hand shot out, closing around her elbow with unyielding strength, steadying her before she could stumble. "I beg your pardon," a low voice said, close enough that she felt it more than heard it. Clara looked up. He was taller at this distance than he had seemed below, the broad lines of his shoulders filling the narrow space. Candlelight from the corridor caught the dark wave of his hair, the clean angle of his jaw. His eyes, up close, were even more unsettling. A grey so deep it skirted the edge of black with a cool clarity that missed very little. It was the Duke of Ashbourne. For the second time that night he was looking directly at her. "Forgive me," he said again, fingers still firm at her elbow, his gaze steady on her face. "I did not see that anyone occupied this particular corner. It appears tonight is full of surprises." Clara's heart hammered so loudly, she was amazed he could not hear it. "If anyone was in the wrong, Your Grace, it was I," she managed, dipping a halting curtsy in the limited space his nearness allowed. "I should not have been lurking near the doorway. I was only seeking a little quiet." "One hardly blames you," he murmured, his mouth curved not quite into a smile. "The noise in there could rouse the dead." He paused. "I believe I have seen you before this moment." Her throat went dry. Had he recognized her from the gallery? "I do not think so, Your Grace," she said, clinging to politeness as to a rope. "I am quite certain you have not." His gaze did not waver. On the contrary, a lady in an ivory gown, watching from the shadows above one's head is rather difficult to overlook, however much she may wish it otherwise. Heat flooded her face. He had seen her, not once, but twice, and somewhere, only a few walls away, Beatrice and Lady Agnes waited in the pressing crowd, searching for the same man whose hand still rested, warm and inescapable, on Clara's arm. For a breathless moment, neither of them moved. She was acutely aware of everything: the warmth of his hand through kid leather, the faint starch scent of his linen, the quiet hum of the ballroom beyond the door. It was absurd that a single man, however titled, could make the world narrow to the space of a corridor and the distance between two heartbeats. Slowly, as if remembering propriety, he released her arm. "Forgive my frankness," he said, his voice pitched low so their words would not carry, "but ladies who hide themselves at royal balls are something of a curiosity to me." "I did not mean to be curious," Clara replied, wishing her tongue would behave and say something bland, forgettable. "I meant only to be out of the way." His brows lifted. "And have you succeeded?" "I beg your pardon, Your Grace." He inclined his head toward the ballroom. "You have removed yourself from the company of those who would ignore you. In doing so, you have secured the undivided attention of the one man every matchmaking mama in that room is currently hunting like a stag." A glint of dry humor touched his eyes. "If your intention was to avoid notice, it has failed spectacularly." Her lips parted in startled outrage, then to her horror curved. A small disbelieving laugh escaped her. "I assure you, Your Grace, no mama has ever hunted me, matchmaking or otherwise." "No?" He studied her with that same unnerving attentiveness. "They are either blind or stupid." Clara stared. Compliments were not unknown to her. They were often ladled over Beatrice in thick, sugary quantities, but they had rarely, if ever, been directed at her. She did not quite know what to do with this one. "I am neither blind nor stupid," he continued more quietly, "and I have eyes enough to see when someone is determined not to be seen." The words struck too close. She looked away, gaze sliding to the tall window beside them. Beyond the glass, the gardens lay dim, touched by moonlight. "It is not determination, Your Grace. Habit, perhaps. Habits can be broken," he said, "if one chooses." Her fingers brushed unconsciously against the hidden crackle of her mother's letter. "Some are not so easily mended." A silence fell, not uncomfortable, merely expectant. "I do not know your name," he said at last. It was not a question, but it held one. She swallowed. To give it felt like stepping across some invisible threshold. "Clara," she said, "Miss Clara Whitmore." Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, at the family name. "Whitmore," he repeated. "Your father is Lord Whitmore of Redcombe?" "Yes, I was introduced to him earlier this evening," the Duke said slowly. "I saw him with Lady Whitmore and their daughter." He did not say, "our daughter." "You were not with them?" "No." Clara kept her eyes fixed on the garden. "I was delayed." "Delayed," he repeated, tasting the word. "And so arrived alone, in your mother's gown, to watch from the shadows." He tipped his head, studying her profile. "That is not delay, Miss Whitmore. That is exile." The word stole her breath. No one had ever named it so. "I have no place on that floor," she murmured, more to the glass than to him. "I came only to see it once, to stand where my mother once stood and know what it was she wished for me." "And was it what she wished?" he asked. Clara thought of the glittering whirl below, of Beatrice's practiced laugh, of her father's hunched shoulders, of the careful cruelty that made a girl invisible in her own home. "I do not yet know," she admitted. "I have only seen it from the edges." "That is easily remedied," he said. Before she could pass the meaning of this, he stepped back half a pace and bowed, not the distant, impersonal inclination he had given half the room, but a deliberate, measured gesture directed solely at her. "Miss Whitmore," the Duke of Ashbourne said, his voice low yet carrying its own unmistakable authority, "will you do me the honor of dancing the next waltz with me?" The world lurched. No, I cannot. Truly, Your Grace, you must not." Her hands flew up in reflexive protest. "There are ladies far more suitable. My sister, for one. She is expecting—" "Your sister is already quite thoroughly surrounded," he interrupted, something cool and implacable entering his tone. "She is in no immediate danger of being overlooked." He straightened, and for the first time she glimpsed the full weight of his rank, not as an abstract thing, but as a force others bent around. "I, however, am in danger of being bored to death by the same 5 conversations repeated in different gowns. You have so far spared me that fate. I should like you to continue." "You do not know me," she whispered. "Not yet." His gaze held hers. "But I should like to." Her heart stumbled. "If you refuse me," he added softer, "I shall be obliged to ask one of those matchmaking mamas instead. They will consider it encouragement. I beg you will not be so cruel." A bewildered, incredulous bubble of laughter rose in her chest. "You manipulate most dreadfully, Your Grace." "I am desperate," he replied, and this time a ghost of a real smile touched his mouth. "Say yes, Miss Whitmore." "Courage," her mother had written. "Let you be seen." "Yes," Clara heard herself say. In the next breath he offered his arm. She laid her hand upon it, the contact sparking along her nerves. Together they walked back toward the ballroom. As they crossed the threshold, the hum of conversation shifted, then dropped, as if someone had drawn in a collective breath. Heads turned, fans stilled. The Duke of Ashbourne was leading an unknown lady in an ivory gown onto the royal ballroom floor, and, on the far side of the room, Lady Agnes Whitmore's fingers crushed the ribs of her fan into splintered ruin. The polished floor felt treacherously smooth beneath Clara's slippers as they descended together into the bright heart of the ballroom. Sound pressed in on her, rustle of satin, the faint clink of glass, a soft susurrus of astonishment that followed their progress like a wake. It was as though every whisper in the room had turned its face toward her. At the edge of the dance floor, the master of ceremonies half bowed, staff tucked against his shoulder, eyes wide with speculation. "Your Grace," he murmured, "shall I announce Miss Clara Whitmore?" the Duke said before Clara could protest, his voice calm, unhurried, utterly certain. "Daughter of Lord Whitmore of Redcombe." His gaze did not leave her face. "If you please." The words fell into the hushed air like stones into still water. "Miss Clara Whitmore," the master of ceremonies proclaimed, his voice ringing out, "with His Grace the Duke of Ashbourne." A ripple ran through the crowd. Clara caught fragments, as if in a dream. "Clara, I thought the pretty one was called Beatrice. Didn't even know there was another daughter. That gown, though, surely Lady Whitmore would not let such a dress languish in a trunk." Her fingers trembled where they rested on the Duke's sleeve. He glanced down just once. "Look at me," he said quietly. She dragged her gaze up to his. The room blurred at the edges. "We will turn in a circle," he murmured, as the first strains of a new waltz rose. "All that is required of you is to follow my lead. Everything else is noise, do you understand?" "I am not certain I know how," she confessed, mortified by the breathlessness in her voice. His mouth tipped at one corner. "Fortunately, I do." He led her into position, his right hand settling at her waist, his left taking her gloved fingers. The contact sent a shock through her, not unpleasant, but startling, like the first touch of cold water on warm skin. "1, 2, 3, he said softly, guiding her into the first sweeping turn. Her body remembered the steps she had practiced alone in the schoolroom, moving with an invisible partner while the house slept. With him, the movements, smoothed, evened, missteps that might have unbalanced her were absorbed by the surety of his frame. After the first revolution, she realized they were dancing. The chandelier light caught the seed pearls at her neckline, casting faint glimmers on his black coat. Around them, the circle of onlookers adjusted, expanding just enough to witness without intruding. He looked down at her, not with amusement, not with indulgence, but with that same intent focus he had in the corridor, as if this moment deserved his full attention. "You dance very well for someone who does not know how," he said. "I have had private practice," she replied, dizzy with the movement and the sheer absurdity of speaking to a duke while half the ton stared. "In the shadows?" His fingers tightened slightly at her back. "Of course. The shadows can be safer," she admitted, then wished she had kept the thought to herself. "Safe," he repeated, as though testing the word. "I have known too much of that variety of safety, the kind that costs more than it protects." She glanced up at him, curiosity edging past fear. "How does safety cost a duke, Your Grace?" "A great deal when it is purchased by silence," he said, eyes fixed somewhere over her shoulder for a moment, the lines at the corners deepening. "By doing what others expect, no matter how little it suits one's own conscience." She wanted to ask what precisely he meant, but the music carried them through a turn that faced them toward the side of the room where her family stood. Lady Agnes was pale beneath her powder, her lips a hard, compressed line. The remains of her fan dangled from stiff fingers. Beside her, Beatrice stared, confusion and outrage warring in her expression. Lord Whitmore looked as if a draught had swept his wig away, revealing something raw and frightened beneath. Clara's step faltered. The Duke's hand steadied her at once. "Eyes on me," he said softly. "Unless you wish to trip and give them something more to talk about." "They will be furious," she whispered. "Undoubtedly," he said. "I find I can live with their displeasure." "You do not have to," she burst out. "You could have chosen anyone, and they would have applauded. Instead, you chose a woman whose own family pretends she does not exist." He regarded her for a long moment. "Miss Whitmore, I am a man who has spent 3 seasons listening to people tell me what I have to do. If I must endure one more ball, one more parade of painted smiles, I reserve the right to at least choose the company I find unusual." "Unusual," she echoed faintly. "Do not take offense," he said. "I mean it as a compliment. You look at this room as if you are seeing it for the first time instead of calculating how to best use it. That is rare. And," his voice lowered further, "I cannot quite bear the thought of you returning to your shadows, believing you were meant for nowhere else." Her throat thickened. "You scarcely know me," she said again, but the protest felt weaker. "I know enough to wish to know more," he replied. They turned again, the room sweeping by in a blur of color. For a few measures there was only the rhythm of their steps, the pull and release of the music, the strange, heady sense that the world had narrowed to their shared orbit. When the waltz at last slowed, then stilled, a hush held for a single heartbeat. Then the room erupted in polite applause. The Duke bowed over her hand, his lips barely brushing her glove. "Thank you, Miss Whitmore," she curtsied, aware that her legs trembled. "Thank you, Your Grace." As he straightened, a shadow loomed at the edge of their little circle of space. "Your Grace," Lady Agnes said, her voice smooth as satin drawn over steel. "How very fortunate that you have already made the acquaintance of our dear Clara. I am Lady Whitmore, her stepmother." Her eyes, when they met Clara's, burned with cold fury. "I trust," Lady Agnes added sweetly, "that there has been no misunderstanding as to her place in our family." For an instant the words seemed to hang in the air between them, sharp as glass. Clara kept her head bowed as she had been trained, but she could feel Lady Agnes's gaze on her like the point of a pin. The eyes of half the room pricked her skin as well, invisible needles of curiosity and judgment. The Duke straightened from his bow, every line of his body suddenly very still. "On the contrary, Lady Whitmore," he said, his voice polite but edged with steel, "I believe I understand Miss Whitmore's place in your family quite clearly." Lady Agnes's fan, what remained of it, fluttered once, twice. "She is a good girl," she said smoothly, "grateful for the home we provide, but she is of a quieter disposition than my younger daughter. Shy, better suited to domestic pursuits than to prominence." She let her gaze drift over Clara's gown, her lip curving faintly. "Indeed, until this evening, Clara has never even been properly presented. One does not thrust such a retiring creature into the glare of a royal ball without preparation. I fear she has been quite overwhelmed." "My lady," Clara whispered, mortified, "please." "Your concern does you credit," the Duke said, cutting across Lady Agnes's explanation before it could deepen into outright humiliation. "But I cannot agree that Miss Whitmore is unsuited to prominence. She has borne the glare of this room with more grace than many who have spent their lives courting it." A murmur rose from the watching throng. Lady Agnes's smile did not falter, but her fingers dug into Beatrice's arm. "Your Grace is kind, yet I cannot permit you to be misled. Clara's appearance here this evening was quite irregular. I would not have her mistake a single dance offered in generosity for an elevation beyond her station." Clara flinched. The words struck deeper because they were wrapped in that silken tone she knew too well. The Duke's eyes cooled. "I do not offer anything in generosity, Lady Whitmore," he said. "I asked your stepdaughter to dance because I wish to dance with her. If there has been any elevation this evening, it is mine." The shock that rippled through the onlookers was almost audible. Before Lady Agnes could muster a reply, a hesitant voice broke in. "Your Grace, Lady Whitmore." Lord Whitmore had edged closer, his expression pinched, his hands worrying his gloves. His gaze flickered from Clara to the Duke, then to his wife. I beg pardon if there has been any misunderstanding. Clara is my eldest daughter." His voice faltered on the word eldest, as though surprised to find it on his own tongue. "Her presence here is unexpected," but he seemed to search for something, anything, to say in her favor, and found only the plain truth. "She has done nothing wrong." For the first time that night he looked at Clara properly. His eyes were tired, guilty, but they were on her. Something fragile inside her ached. Lady Agnes's nostrils flared. "My lord." Lord Whitmore cleared his throat, straightening a fraction. "You will not speak as if she were some grasping intruder, Agnes," he said quietly. "This is her mother's gown. She has as much right to it, and to her own name, as any of us." The room seemed to tilt. Clara had never heard him contradict Lady Agnes in public, perhaps not even in private. The Duke inclined his head, as if a point had been silently conceded. "I am pleased to make the acquaintance of your eldest daughter, Lord Whitmore," he said. "I hope it will not be the last time we speak." Lady Agnes recovered herself with astounding swiftness. "Of course not, Your Grace," she said, her tone honeyed again. "But you must also meet our younger daughter. Beatrice, my love, come forward." Beatrice curtsied prettily, eyes wide with manufactured innocence. "Your Grace," she breathed. "What an honor. Mamma has spoken so often of your distinction." "I am sure she has," Ashbourne said, with a civility so smooth Clara could not tell whether he mocked or not. "Miss Beatrice." He bowed. It was the sort of bow a man might give 100 young ladies in a season. Polite, empty. Beatrice's gaze darted to Clara, resentment flashing there for an instant, before smoothing into a bland smile. "I had feared you might be quite engaged all evening," she said, "but perhaps later you will permit." "I am already engaged for the next set," he said, cutting her off gently. His hand found Clara's again, his touch firm, unhesitating. "I have begged Miss Whitmore's permission to escort her to the refreshment room. The floor is very warm." He looked down at Clara, inviting contradiction. Her instinct was to refuse, to flee, to sink back into the shadows where Lady Agnes's eyes could not flay her, but his fingers tightened slightly, grounding her. Her mother's letter rustled against her heart. "Yes," Clara heard herself say, "I would welcome some air." Then, with your leave, Ashbourne said to Lord Whitmore, pointedly to her father, not to Lady Agnes, I shall return your daughter to you once she has recovered her composure. Lord Whitmore nodded, looking dazed. Lady Agnes's smile was brittle enough to crack. Do not keep her long, Your Grace, she said. Clara is delicate. Clara met her stepmother's gaze for the briefest instant. She did not feel delicate. She felt as if someone had drawn her outline in sharper ink. The Duke offered his arm. As Clara placed her hand upon it, she felt the weight of 100 stairs. They moved together toward the edge of the crowd, the throng parting like water before them. I am so sorry, she whispered, once they were clear of immediate earshot, heart thudding. You did not come here to be embroiled in my family's disorder. I came here to endure another tedious ball and satisfy a king's notion of duty, he replied. Instead, I find myself embroiled in something far more interesting. I cannot say I regret the exchange. You will, she said faintly, when Lady Agnes corners you and tells you that I am nothing, that I do not belong here. She has already tried, he said. I have formed my own opinion. They passed beneath an arch into a quieter antechamber, where the music dulled and the air cooled. A marble door stood open to a small terrace overlooking the gardens. Come, he said, we will risk the night air. If anyone objects, I shall claim it as a medical necessity on your behalf. Despite herself, she smiled. The terrace was lit by only a scatter of lamps, their glow softened by the veils of ivy climbing the stone. Beyond, the gardens lay wrapped in silver and shadow, the distant music drifting like a memory. Clara drew a deeper breath. The cold kissed her flushed cheeks, easing the tightness in her chest. For the record, Ashbourne said quietly, releasing her arm, but staying near, I do not think you delicate. No? She wrapped her hands together to hide their lingering tremor. My stepmother would disagree. I have watched soldiers crack under less scrutiny than you have borne tonight, he replied. You are frightened, but you are still standing. That is not delicacy, Miss Whitmore. That is fortitude. Something in his tone, matter of fact without flourish, made her throat sting. You understand very little of my life, she whispered. In my home I am invisible. He finished so softly she barely heard it. She looked at him sharply. I have seen it before, he said, his gaze on the dark garden. In houses, in regiments, in drawing rooms. Those whom everyone uses and no one sees. It offends me. You are a duke, she said, attempting lightness and failing. Surely the world arranges itself not to offend you. You would be surprised, he said, dryly, or perhaps not. You seem to see more than most. She wanted to ask him what exactly the world had done to offend him, but footsteps scraped beyond the arch. Clara, Lady Agnes's voice knifed through the gentler night sounds. She swept onto the terrace like a storm cloud, Beatrice hovering at her shoulder, eyes bright with avid curiosity. Your Grace, Lady Agnes said, with a curtsy that did not quite disguise the fury in her eyes, I must insist that my stepdaughter return to the carriage at once. She is quite overcome. Clara's heart lurched. The night, it seemed, was not yet done with her. For a heartbeat, Clara felt like a child again, caught in some small trespass. The stolen biscuit, the book read by too dim candlelight, Lady Agnes's shadow blotting out the rest of the world. She turned, hands folding automatically before her. I am well, my lady, she said, summoning a composure she did not feel. There is no need. Lady Agnes did not look at her. Her attention was fixed on Ashbourne, the way a general might assess an unpredictable ally. I fear my stepdaughter is not the best judge of her own condition, Your Grace, she replied. She is unused to society, overeager, prone to misinterpret simple politeness. Each word was a little lash, soft enough for those inside to miss the sting, sharp enough for Clara to feel every strike. Beatrice pressed closer, eyes wide with dramatic concern. Clara never comes to town, she added helpfully. She is far happier among her books and sewing. Truly, Your Grace, you need not trouble yourself. She slipped away without Mamma's knowledge. A pause sweetened with poison. She does not know how these things look. Clara's stomach clenched. The letter at her breast felt suddenly heavier, like a stone. Ashbourne regarded them in silence for a moment, his profile carved against the pale terrace light. When he spoke, his voice was courteous, but it had lost any trace of warmth. On the contrary, Miss Beatrice, he said, I should say your sister understands very well how things look. It appears she has spent most of her life observing them from the edges. Lady Agnes's smile thinned. Your Grace, I beg you, will not be misled by her dramatics. Clara has always been inclined to disappear, Ashbourne supplied softly. I cannot help but notice that everyone but Miss Whitmore has spoken for her in the last 5 minutes. It is a habit that might make any woman vanish. He turned back to Clara. Do you wish to leave, Miss Whitmore? The question startled her. No one ever asked what she wished. The answer rose at once. No. She did not want the night to end, did not want to crawl back into her narrow life as if this single shimmer of difference had never happened. But she could already imagine Lady Agnes's vengeance, Beatrice's scorn, her father's weary avoidance. I should not have come, she whispered. I did not mean to cause trouble. That was not my question, he said quietly. Her eyes met his. The music from inside drifted faintly through the arch. A waltz she now knew she could dance. Her mother's words echoed, "Let you be seen, Clara." No, she said, the word barely more than breath but solid as stone. I do not wish to leave, not yet. The silence that followed was weighted. Lady Agnes's fan, she had found another somewhere, snapped shut. That will be quite enough of this nonsense, she said, stepping forward to seize Clara's wrist. You will come with me this instant. You do not comprehend the damage you are doing. You will ruin your sister's chances, embarrass your father, before she could drag Clara away. Another hand closed around Lady Agnes's gloved fingers, not roughly but with an unyielding restraint. Ashbourne's. Lady Whitmore, he said, his voice softening in a way that made it somehow more dangerous. You will kindly remove your hand from your stepdaughter. I do not tolerate scenes, nor, his gaze hardened, bullying. Colour rose, blotchy and unflattering, along Lady Agnes's throat. You presume, she hissed, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second. You know nothing of what we have given up for this girl, her keep, her education, when all the while she— Agnes! Lord Whitmore's voice floated from the archway, brittle with strain. He stood there, a little out of breath, as if he had hurried and regretted it. The lamplight caught the deep grooves beside his mouth. That is enough, he said. She spun toward him. You will stand there and watch her. Undo everything we have worked for? She demanded, more loudly than she intended. The debts, the sacrifices. Do you truly think a man like his Grace would look at her twice if not for— She broke off, realizing too late how much she had said. Ashbourne's eyes sharpened. If not for what, Lady Whitmore? Lady Agnes recovered herself in a rush. For pity, of course, she said hastily. She has always been so meek, so grateful. I only meant— Enough, Lord Whitmore repeated more firmly. He stepped onto the terrace, shoulders squared in a way Clara had not seen in years. Ashbourne, he said, and then, with an effort of respect, Your Grace, I must apologize. I failed, in my foolishness, to see what brought my eldest daughter here tonight. Her mother would not thank me for it. He looked at Clara again, and sorrow filled his eyes. This is your mother's night, isn't it? I should have remembered. Her throat closed. You knew, she asked hoarsely, about the gown, about the letter. I knew she wished it for you, he said. I did not know Mrs. Briggs had kept a letter. I did know, he swallowed. I knew I had been a coward. I let Agnes convince me that it was better if you stayed quiet, took less, needed less, because of the debts, Ashbourne said softly. It was not a question. Lord Whitmore's shoulders sagged, his brief scrap of bravery fraying under the weight of shame. You know of them, then? My steward does not allow me to ignore sums quite as large as yours, Ashbourne replied. Your petitions have reached even my remote corner of the country. Clara flinched. Petitions? Lady Agnes seized on it. You see, Your Grace, she cried, we have barely kept this household afloat. We could not afford a season for both girls. Beatrice is younger, more promising. Clara understood that, or she ought to have. Ashbourne's gaze moved from Lord Whitmore to Clara, lingering on the tight set of her jaw, the way her hands clenched in her skirts. I think, he said slowly, Miss Whitmore understands far too much. Far more than anyone has had the decency to say aloud. Before Lady Agnes could snap back, a new voice carried from the doorway, clear, young, and tinged with amusement. Your Grace, said Princess Charlotte, framed by the arch like a figure in a painting, you have been much sought these last 10 minutes. My father grows impatient when his favorite duke vanishes with a mystery lady. Her gaze shifted to Clara, curious but not unkind. Will you not introduce us? The terrace seemed to shrink. The king, the gaze of the entire court. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. Ashbourne inclined his head. Your Highness, he said, may I present Miss Clara Whitmore, eldest daughter of Lord Whitmore of Redcombe. His voice did not waver. I was just about to bring her before their majesties. Lady Agnes made a strangled sound. "You cannot mean—" "On the contrary," Ashbourne said. He held out his arm to Clara once more, his eyes steady on hers. "If you will trust me, Miss Whitmore." The night, Clara thought, was indeed not done with her. Her fingers trembled as she set her hand on his sleeve. Together, under the princess's watchful eye and her family's shocked silence, they stepped back into the blaze of the ballroom, toward the thrones at the far end, where the king and queen waited, and every eye in the room turned to see exactly whom the Duke of Ashbourne was so determined not to let vanish. The walk toward the thrones felt longer than the drive from Whitmore House. Clara's hand rested on Ashbourne's sleeve, light as a pea, feather and anchored as if by iron. The crowd parted before them in ripples, silks drawing back, murmurs rising and falling, eyes turning to follow the Duke and the unknown woman in ivory by his side. At the far end of the ballroom, beneath a canopy of carved gold, the king and queen sat in imposing calm. Musicians softened their playing. The air itself seemed to lean in. Ashbourne stopped at the foot of the dais and bowed. Clara sank into the deepest curtsy she had ever attempted, the world narrowing to the polished floor and the thunder of her own pulse. "Rise, Ashbourne," the king said, voice rich with age and amusement. "You vanish from my ball with my daughter's dance partner and return with a mystery in cream silk. Explain yourself." There was a ripple of laughter. Clara's cheeks burned. "With pleasure, Your Majesty," Ashbourne replied. "May I present Miss Clara Whitmore, eldest, daughter of Lord Whitmore of Redcombe." Clara lifted her head. The king's gaze was shrewd but not unkind, his eyes tracing her face, the fall of her gown. Beside him, the queen leaned forward, her gloved hand tightening on the arm of her chair. "That dress," the queen murmured. "Eleanor's dress." Clara's breath caught. "Your Majesty," she whispered. The queen's expression softened, the formality around her thinning for a moment. "Lady Eleanor, Whitmore was presented the same year I was," she said. "She wore that very gown with those tiny rosebuds at the sleeve. Your mother danced until dawn and swore her feet had turned to stone. We shared a pot of chocolate in the retiring room and laughed until the mistress of robes scolded us both." Tears stung Clara's eyes. "You knew her," she said, the words almost soundless. "I liked her," the queen replied. She was not afraid to say when her stays pinched or when a man bored her. Her gaze sharpened. "You have her eyes." Clara swallowed hard. She wished me to stand where she once stood," she managed. "I have taken longer to arrive than she hoped." The king studied her, then flicked a glance toward where Lord Whitmore stood in the crowd, pale and strained, Lady Agnes rigid at his side. "I could have sworn," he said dryly, "that Lord Whitmore's letters spoke only of one daughter in need of advantageous marriage. The second appears to have slipped his quill." A nervous chuckle ran through the court. Lord Whitmore flinched. Clara drew a breath. "It was easier, sir, for some to forget half the burden when no one saw it," she said softly. "Tonight, I did not wish to be forgotten." There was a small, startled silence. It broke when the king let out a low huff of appreciation. "Honest," he said. "Dangerous quality at court." He turned his attention to Ashbourne. "And you, my friend, you drag her out of shadows and into the full glare of my displeasure. Explain that." "With respect, sire," Ashbourne said, "I thought it time someone did." He did not look away from the king, but his hand shifted, just enough that Clara felt the brush of his fingers against hers, deliberate, anchoring. "I have received Lord Whitmore's petitions," Ashbourne continued. "I have heard every schemed introduction, every rehearsed laugh of his younger daughter and half the debutantes in London. Yet it was Miss Whitmore, uninvited, unannounced, wearing her mother's gown, and more courage than sense, who understood that all she wished for was to be seen once as herself." A faint smile touched the king's mouth. "And you claim this uncompromising honesty as your dance partner, and more, if your majesties permit," Ashbourne said, voice steady. "I intend to pay my addresses to Miss Whitmore. I have no patience for a courtship conducted like a cattle market. I would have everyone here understand that I will not be paraded or handled. I choose for myself." The words dropped into the hall like a stone into deep water. Lady Agnes swayed. Beatrice's hand flew to her throat. Lord Whitmore closed his eyes for an instant, torn between terror and relief. The queen's gaze returned to Clara. "Do you wish this, child?" she asked quietly. Not the title, not the whispers. Him. Clara looked up at Ashbourne. The candlelight caught the lines carved by duty and loss at the corners of his mouth, the guardedness in his eyes, the careful gentleness he wore like a shield he had chosen, not inherited. "In the gallery," she said slowly. "He saw me when no one else did. On the terrace, he listened when others spoke over me. If I must walk into the light, Your Majesty, I would rather do it with someone who knows what it is to stand alone in a crowded room." Ashbourne's breath caught. The king's brows climbed. The queen's smile, when it came, was small and fierce. "Then I give you my blessing," she said, "and my warning. Dukes are stubborn. So are Whitmore women. You will need that courage your mother left you." "I will try to be worthy of both," Clara whispered. The king waved, her hand half irritated, half amused. "Very well. Let it be known that Ashbourne's choice this evening is Miss Clara Whitmore, and any who treat her as invisible shall answer to me. Now, for heaven's sake, let the music play again before my court dies of suspended gossip." Laughter broke the tension. The orchestra prodded into action, struck up a lively tune. As they stepped back from the dais, Clara caught a last glimpse of her father. He bowed, his head to her. A small awkward gesture, but directed at her for the first time in years. Beatrice's glare was hot enough to scorch. Lady Agnes's face was a mask of brittle civility, already calculating new strategies. It no longer hollowed Clara out. It no longer defined the room. Later, months later, Clara stood at the tall windows of Ashbourne's estate, watching dawn lay pale gold across fields she was only beginning to call hers. The house was quieter than the palace, but the silence here felt different. It was not the hush of being unseen. It was the peace of being allowed to exist without pleasing anyone at every breath. Behind her, papers lay signed. A marriage settlement, generous enough to steady Lord Whitmore's faltering accounts without letting Lady Agnes wield them as a cudgel. Letters from her father came more often now, awkward and repentant, with shy notes from Beatrice. Tucked inside, her sharpness blunted by the realization that Clara's rise did not mean her ruin. On the mantel, framed carefully, her mother's letter sat beside a new one in a firm, unfamiliar hand. The Queen's, written after the wedding, welcoming Clara formally to court, and reminding her that Eleanor's laughter had once echoed down the same corridors. Ashbourne, Gabriel, in the privacy of their shared life, entered the room with 2 steaming cups. Of chocolate, a conspiratorial glint in his eyes. "For your mother," he said, passing her one, "and for the girl who thought she belonged in galleries." Clara took the cup, their fingers brushing. "She was foolish," she said softly, "but she climbed the stairs anyway." "And I," he replied, "was very fortunate that she did." Outside, the sun cleared the horizon fully, washing the room in light. For the first time, Clara did not flinch from it. She stepped forward out of old shadows into the day that was hers. Because sometimes the story does not change when a duke claims a woman before a court. It changes when an invisible woman dares to claim herself first and discovers that the world finally must learn to see her. Now a word to you who listened to Clara's story. Perhaps you know what it is to be the quiet one in the room, the helper, the afterthought. Perhaps you have worn hand-me-down dreams and told yourself that wanting more is selfish. It isn't. Clara did not become worthy when a duke chose her. She was worthy when she sat alone in a dim drawing room, hands shaking over her mother's letter, and decided to step into the night anyway. The ball, the waltz, the royal approval, those were echoes of a choice she had already made. You may never stand in a gilded hall under 1,000 candles, but there will be moments when you can speak instead of swallowing your words, step forward instead of shrinking back, keep your courage instead of giving it away. Those small rebellions are your royal balls. And somewhere, in ways you may never fully see, the world shifts when you finally refuse to be invisible in your own life. YouTube description. Short, no spoilers. She was the forgotten daughter, hidden in shadows while her sister was groomed for a duke. At the royal ball wearing her late mother's gown, Clara slips in only to watch, until the Duke of Ashbourne sees her in the gallery and claims her for the waltz that will change everything. If this story moved you, subscribe, like and share your thoughts in the comments so more hearts can find it.